The story I'm about to tell you takes place including myself, my mother, and my younger sister. We were in St. Francisville, Louisiana, staying at the infamous Myrtles plantation. I'm aware that when it comes to touristy haunted places, the paranormal events that may occur there are questionable regarding the issue of their validity. As such, I tend to err on the side of caution with my own beliefs, and I always do a thorough check of wherever I'm staying. I keep a lookout for artificial motors, wires, basically anything that can cause things to happen that may seem paranormal. The cabin that we stayed in was clear. We arrived at the plantation around 2 p.m. that first day. We were given a complimentary tour of the grounds. I was getting vibes all over the place. It was pretty insane from the moment that I stepped foot on that soil, to be honest. I state the bit about getting vibes with emphasis on the fact that I do get vibes. Sometimes. Rarely. And never that strong. After the tour was finished, we were shown to our rooms, we were let in, and left to our own devices. I did my evaluation on the room, then afterward noticed that any time I neared the back door, I picked up on energy even more strongly than I had been during the tour of the rest of the grounds. I just felt that something had happened there, and I knew that I had to find out what. It was about 5 p.m. by that point, and understandably, we were getting pretty hungry. We left the plantation to go into town and get some dinner. We got back around 6:30, and were walking back over to our cabin when a friendly woman that we'd seen earlier walked over to us. She asked if we wanted to see her room. It was located in the actual plantation house, whereas we were staying in what would have originally been one of the slave cabins. We said yes, of course, so she took us up there. We looked around, and at first there was nothing noticeable as far as feelings or energy goes. Then I went into the bathroom. It was the most awful, oppressive atmosphere in there. It was creepy and terrible, and I hated it instantly. I just wanted to leave. I didn't necessarily think that something had happened there, rather that something inhabited that space. And I knew that it was not something kind. We didn't stay very long. Maybe 15-20 minutes later, we went back to our cabin and settled in for the night. Lots of vibes in that cabin, and my sister and I, we were somewhat younger at the time, shared a bed because we were scared. We stayed up late playing a game. When midnight rolled around, we decided that it was probably best to put it away and go to bed. As soon as we had put the game up and silence set in, however, I noticed a sound. The rocking chair on the front porch was creaking as it moved. Backward, forward, backward, forward. Hard enough that I could be certain that the wind was not responsible. I freaked out a little bit, but decided that I wasn't going to mention it to my sister. It would probably just scare her. We laid down for the night. She got to sleep quick. I, on the other hand, was having sleep issues. Nothing but thoughts and worries running through my mind. The moment I heard footsteps on the stones outside of our cabin, though, all of those pesky voices became irrelevant. Keep in mind, our cabin was fenced in, so it couldn't have been anyone who didn't have the key. Regardless, I heard the footsteps, and they continued as I heard the light slapping sounds of feet on the wooden porch along with the groan of someone's weight. They continued forward, right through the door, and I heard as whoever it was passed right by my bed. The whole time, I saw nothing. The footstep sounds made their way across the room to the wall, then out the back door. I will say that while I saw nothing, I did smell something. It was as though someone were wearing rosehip perfume, trailing the scent along behind them everywhere they walked. This event took place at about 1 in the morning. already having trouble getting to sleep, I didn't rest until 2.5 hours later, approximately 3:30 a.m. When we got up the next day, we went into the main house for breakfast, where we heard stories from other campers about their experiences. Theirs were equally intriguing, including people who felt a presence sit down on their bed in the middle of the night, and a person coming out of a cabin to tell people to be quiet. Yet the cabin in question was totally devoid of anyone alive. We ate, shared our stories, and returned to our cabin. We sat there for a while playing games on our tablets, just relaxing really, as it was a nice room despite its history and the fact that it was haunted. I can't remember why, but my sister and mom got into an argument. The disagreement obviously didn't sit well with whatever spirits were occupying the cabin, because they were both interrupted by the faucet in the bathroom being turned on full force, and then back off again. It startled all three of us. We cleared out of the cabin in less than 30 seconds after that. That is the end to my Myrtle's Plantation story. I am never going to forget how terrifying that it was to be awake by myself in a cabin in the middle of nowhere, and suddenly realize that you are not alone. In August of 2013, I visited the small town of Cloutierville, Louisiana, to investigate the cellar of a tiny, abandoned farmhouse. I was drawn to this place because in 1932, a woman was murdered here, and in 1933, her husband mysteriously vanished. While this situation alone was not of particular interest to me, the story surrounding it captured my attention. The following is the history behind the haunted candle of Cloutierville as I have come to understand it. In 1932, the farmhouse was owned by Adam and Emily Benoit. Adam was a farmer, a hard man, and not a particularly likable one. Although he did run a successful farm, he was also an alcoholic and spent most nights at the local pub. His wife Emily was a quiet woman who had no social ties, and instead spent all of her time at home, alone. In June of 1932, Emily was found murdered in the cellar. Police records state that she had been struck from behind with a blunt object. They were able to determine that she did not die immediately. She had crawled from the place of impact to the back of the cellar. In her outstretched hand was a candle holder. It would have been the only source of light. Adam Benoit was naturally listed as the primary suspect, but he had an alibi. He was with his friend that night at the pub. The friend was a local drunkard with a less than stellar reputation, but nevertheless, Adam's alibi was accepted. The murder of Emily Benoit, to this day, remains unsolved. Early in February of 1933, Adam Benoit was reported missing. He had not been seen at the pub for several days, which was very out of the ordinary for the recent widower. Police investigation led to the cellar in which Emily had met her demise. The lead officer wrote that he had heard a man sobbing, but he found the cellar to be empty. The only sign that anyone had been there was a single candle burning against the back wall. The officer also wrote that upon extinguishing the candle, the sobbing faded. It's also in the record that the police officer found the word "alone" carved into the wall. The whereabouts of Adam Benoit also went unsolved. He was never seen again. The following year, in 1934, the farmhouse was purchased by a man named John Morrell. When he was not seen or heard from in several weeks, police officers once again were led to the cellar to investigate. They found the exact same candle flickering dimly from the shadows. The officers once again reported hearing a man sobbing, and noted having seen the outline of a female form in the weak light. When the candle was extinguished, the voices stopped, and the woman's shadow disappeared. Once again written on the wall was the word alone, only written out 3 times, rather than just the one. Like Adam Benoit, John Morrell was never seen or heard from again. The farmhouse to this day, still in his name, fell into disrepair. When I visited the farmhouse in 2013, I had every intention of exploring the cellar. The building had long been abandoned, so I broke the lock and cautiously ventured inside. I found everything to be completely untouched. Dusty wine bottles still filled the shelves. Old, rusty tools were piled in a corner. At the back of the cellar, I found a candle covered in dust and burned almost to the end. All over the walls of the cellar, across the ceiling, across every inch of surface, was the word alone. As I had expected, the word was written in 2 distinct styles, and I had come prepared. I compared the writing to that of Adam Benoit's journal, as well as John Morrell's signature on the deed. I'm no expert, but the 2 styles appeared to me as identically matching the samples that I had brought with me. There's no way that this wasn't the writing of the 2 long-vanished men. In my curiosity, I lit the candle. Softly at first, then growing louder and louder, I heard the sobbing, the sounds of loss, of despair, the weeping of those abandoned to an eternity of nothingness. And in the shadows, the figure of a woman slowly drifted into view, dancing toward me. I quickly extinguished the flame and left the cellar. But of course, I brought the candle with me. The haunted candle of Cloutierville has sat quietly in my collection for several years now. Only once since that day have I lit the flame. I was in my attic among my collection, and almost immediately I heard the quiet sobbing of poor souls lost in time. I snuffed out the flame. The next day, carved into a rafter in my attic, I discovered a single word. You guessed it. It said, alone. I want to preface this by saying that I am incredibly skeptical when it comes to anything about the supernatural. I tend not to trust anything without scientific evidence. That being said, these experiences I cannot explain away. Beginning in 2014, early 2015, I worked in offshore Louisiana and lived in St. Bernard Parish, where I'd rented a home. My younger sister and her 3 children were also living with me, as she and her husband were having marital problems and had separated. I was only home half the month because my job required me to be out for a week, then home for a week. Whenever I was home, my sister would tell me weird things were happening to her and her kids. She couldn't describe it, but had decided that it was paranormal, as many of us do when faced with something that we can't explain. She told me things were happening like locked doors flying open, then closing again. That if anyone was taking a shower, the lights in the bathroom would flicker on and off the entire time. I chalked it up to her having anxiety about being alone in the house. One night, as I lay in bed, however, I felt a weight pressing down on my legs. I assumed that it was my sister or one of my nephews. I raised up, half asleep, certain that I was about to see the face of a child staring back at me. Instead, all I saw was the concave indentation at the foot of my bed, indicating that something was on it. Whatever it was halfway on my legs and halfway on the mattress. as if it were straddling me. I was completely exhausted from the prior weekend, too tired to react more, moved my feet. As I pulled my legs up into a kind of fetal position, it did occur to me that moving them was difficult. It was almost as if a full-grown man were sitting on top of them. The room I was sleeping in, I had chosen because it had its own bathroom. Later that night, I got up to go in there and could have sworn that I heard a male voice saying, "Get out." It was immediately followed by a loud bang from the kitchen. Nervous, I tiptoed in the direction of the sound. I used my phone's flashlight to navigate, taking care not to wake my sister and her kids who were sleeping in a room close to the kitchen. She had also heard the noise, though, and had come out to see what it was. My garbage can, which was under the sink, had been thrown across the room where it landed beside the television in the living room. Seconds later, my oldest nephew came sprinting from their room, crying and screaming that someone was in there with him and had pushed him and his sister off of the bed. I ran to the room where my sister and kids were, hoping to see nothing. Before I could make it through the doorway, though, I was knocked off of my feet by an unseen punch to my chest. Suddenly, everything we had sitting on the island in the kitchen began flying in every which direction. I got to my feet, yelling at my sister to help me get the babies. With one of the boys in my arms, I ran to my room to grab my phone and car keys. As we entered, every single item that I had in the room was laying on the floor in a big pile. Books, bedding, even my television, which was attached to the wall. Needless to say, we got out of there fast. We completely moved out the very next day. While packing up our stuff, I called the homeowner and told him that we were leaving. When I gave him my reason, I expected him to laugh hysterically at me. He didn't. He wasn't surprised at all. I'm sure he's either been through it himself or had another renter prior to me who had the same encounters. I've never experienced anything like that before or since. My sister and I never spoke of it again. Anyway, that's my haunted story. Stay safe, everyone.